workshop of the National Executive of the ANC. I must repeat, this is a workshop of the National Executive of the ANC. And the National Executive Committee of the ANC then has invited guests from the alliance partners. We welcome you, comrades, from the alliance partners. We also invited some cabinet ministers and deputy ministers. We've invited some comrades from the NGOs. This workshop's focus is how do we give effect to the resolution adopted by National Conference in Nasrec. And that resolution, its key kind of highlight has been the expropriation of land without compensation, without impacting negatively on other sectors of the economy, agricultural production, and food security. This workshop, there are other things. The resolution is long. There are other aspects of it which include support measures, which includes agrarian reform, and a whole range of those issues. We have then structured the workshop not in line with that specific sentence alone, but the workshop is structured around the entire resolution, including agrarian reform and so on. We'll come back to you later in that regard. So the focus of the workshop is the implementation of the resolution. As part of that program, the program is structured. We will have the president opening this workshop and giving us some insights as to how we should move forward. We have invited Comrade Kgalema, our former Secretary General and former President of the Republic of South Africa, because he has been doing a lot of work assigned by Parliament on these aspects to give us some insights in this regard. We have asked Advocate Ngugaitobi to focus on the legal aspect, in particular the constitutional requirements in relation to expropriation without compensation, to give us some insight in that regard. That's a plenary session. After that, we'll go into commissions. When that time comes, we'll come back again and say what are the key focus of each of those commissions. For now, I'm going to focus on those three agenda items. And I'll call on the President Ramaphosa, to take the podium.
Comrade Enoch, as chair of ETC, Comrade Kgalema Motlanthe, former President of the Republic and Deputy President of the African National Congress, Comrade National Chairperson Gwede Mantashe, who I've seen, Comrade SG, members of the National Executive Committee, members of various PECs, members of Parliament, leaders of our alliance components, researchers, comrades and friends. Just to fill up on what was set out by Comrade Enoch, following the adoption of the resolution, we thought it best that we should put together a number of people as our resource who would be able to put before us quite a lot of information on the land question. And to that end, we asked a few comrades, Advocate Thandeka Ncukai Tobi, Ruth Hall, Nomboniso Gasa, and Ben Cousins, to almost be a panel that would assist us. And they produced a document which was put before the NWC, which was later also discussed at the NEC. And following that, we did agree that we would have this workshop. And this workshop, as Comrade Enoch said, is really meant to give full substance and chart a way forward for us as a movement on how we should give effect to the resolution that was adopted by the 54th National Conference. That resolution on the land issue has unleashed in a number of ways perhaps the biggest political debate on any issue since 1994. Wherever you go, there is an opinion being expressed on the land issue by all manner of people. This is to be welcomed. The fact that well over 140,000 submissions have already been submitted to Parliament is indicative of the importance that South Africans from all walks of life attach to this important debate. It is common cause that the debate that our nation is engaged in is about how we should deal with this most important resource, land, that was taken away from our forebears hundreds of years ago. I have in the past characterized the dispossession of land from our forebears as the original sin that was committed against our people by the colonial invaders. In response to the violent onslaught of land dispossession our forebears were subjected to, they engaged in gallant battles and wars to resist and stop the dispossession of their land and to retain their sovereignty. Alfred Daike, an indigenous Mohawk Canadian, who's also an activist and an educator, who is based at Cornell University, describes this historical challenge that people who have been dispossessed of their land and have had to go through more aptly when he says, for many generations, we indigenous people have been in a life and death struggle for survival, for respect of our humanity, restoration of our nationhood, and recognition of our rights. This whole time, he continues, a constant surge of ancestral memory running through our veins has empowered and enlivened us and given us the gifts of tenacity, anger, patience, and love, so that the people may continue and so that the generations that are yet to rise from the earth may know themselves as the real people of their land. The voices of our ancestors continue to call out to us, telling us that it is all about the land, always has been and always will be. Get it back, go back to it. He continues, we have fought for the land and for our connection to it. For 500 years, it is this struggle to restore the living relationship between our ancestors, our land, and ourselves that has defined us as indigenous people, and it is this struggle that has ensured our survival in the face of ignorance and violence. Now that we have proven that we will not accept annihilation, we found ourselves in an era of reconciliation. Close quotes. We are meeting here today to fulfill an undertaking that the founders of our movement made over a century ago. It is an undertaking that is underpinned by the constant surge of our ancestral memory that continues to run through our veins and continues to empower and enliven us and gives us the gifts of tenacity, of anger, patience, and determination. From its formation, the African National Congress has fought for the return of the land to its rightful people. It has fought for the wealth of the country to be shared, for the rights of all its people to be equally and universally respected. We are meeting here to give effect to the demand that was articulated by our forebears when they drafted the Freedom Charter in 1955, that the land shall be shared amongst those who work it. We are, through our presence here, giving dedicated attention to this fundamental task, because the resolution of the land question in South Africa is central to the achievement of a national democratic society. This task we are involved in was so aptly described by David Pilling when he wrote recently in the Financial Times of London that by addressing the land question, we are, in effect, yielding to the inevitability of history. Without the redistribution of land, we will not be able to build a united South Africa. Without the recognition of the property rights of all our people, we will not overcome inequality. Without giving the poor the means to productively work and farm the land, we will not be able to defeat poverty. By addressing the land question, we are engaged in an effort to undo a grave historical injustice. There is a strong moral imperative that drives this effort. There is also a strong political imperative, which is rooted in the formation of the ANC, which extends through successive electoral mandates and which most recently finds expression in the resolutions of the 54th National Conference. There is a clear social imperative to the issue of land. To our people, and indeed to all people, land is about dignity, land is about identity, and land is also about security. It is intimately linked to the preservation of culture and heritage. It is essentially a bridge between the past, the present, and the future. We are engaged in this effort also to heal the wounds of the past. At the same time, we are also driven by a very strong economic imperative. For all its historical, social, and political meaning, land is fundamentally an economic resource. And like all other economic resources in this country, it has historically been employed to serve the interests of a narrow section of society. From the days of colonial conquest, the South African economy has been designed to underperform. The country's assets, its land, its minerals, its human resources, its enterprises have been owned, controlled, and managed in a way that has always prevented the extraction of their full potential and their full value. For as long as ownership, control, and management are concentrated in the hands of a few and serve the interests of a few, South Africa will not be able to realize the potential of its economic assets. By restricting the ownership of land to the white and the wealthy, and by excluding the black and poor majority, the apartheid regime ensured that the country's most valuable economic resources would be severely underutilized. To have placed 87% of land in the ownership of a white minority and only 13% being made available to the black majority was a clear act that was meant to stunt the economic prospects of our country. Perhaps Asemoglu, Gelb, and Robinson describe much more clearly when they say, for a century, South African society was based on an economic and political model where whites structured institutions in order to repress blacks and extract resources from them. In the process, they created probably the most unequal society in the world. The extraction of rents from black people created a massive misallocation of resources. These were not just human, but also physical. Blacks had no access to land or capital, and the Calabar blocked them from upward social mobility and removed the incentives to invest in human capital, close quotes. As a consequence, the South African economy has always been stunted, and its development has been held back for centuries, but because it never got to a point where all the resources of the country were properly and effectively utilized. A central part of our historic responsibility here is to unlock the economic and social potential of this vital national resource. When you return land to those who were forcibly dispossessed of their land, you unlock its economic value. This will give practical effect to what the African National Congress has committed itself to effect radical socio-economic transformation in our country. When you secure rights of labor tenants to the land which they have occupied for generations and generations, you unlock their economic power and the land's economic value. When you provide support, training, and finance to emerging farmers, you unlock the economic value of that land. When you allocate land close to urban centers for housing for the poor, and when you provide our people with serviced sites and the title deeds to their homes, you unlock the economic value of that land. Yesterday was a most historic day on the East Rand as we launched the Tumamina campaign and had the provincial government of Gauteng issuing out title deeds to a number of our people to houses that they have occupied for long without even having a single shred of paper that attests to their ownership of those houses. And they have announced that they are going to be issuing more than 200,000 title deeds from now onwards. And every Friday, is now going to be a title deed Friday for the government of led by the ANC in Gauteng. The Premier also announced that they are now going to unlock large pockets of land that are not utilized and service them. They are going to appropriate those large portions of land, make them available to our people, service the sites, and speed up the process in a program they call Speeding Up the Expropriation of Land, so that our people can get sites either to build their own houses and to have housing built on it within the close environment area of the cities. As one does so, you also unlock the economic potential of all our people. The derivative that will flow from this will be increased investment, job creation, and in the end, economic growth. This workshop has been convened as a consequence of the resolution, as we said earlier, of the 54th conference in December to pursue with greater determination our program of land reform and rural development. At that conference, we took the historic decision that expropriation of land without compensation should be among the key mechanisms available to the government to give effect to land reform and redistribution. This workshop needs to provide direction on how we use this mechanism most effectively to advance land reform, promote agricultural production, reduce poverty, create employment, and enhance food security. This requires a critical appraisal of our land reform program to date. It requires that we reflect critically and perhaps very honestly on the impact of the transformative legislation that we have enacted and the progressive programs that we have implemented over the past 24 years. We must measure the progress we have made against the tasks we set ourselves in the Ready to Govern document when we said our policies must provide access to land both as a productive resource and to ensure that all our citizens have a secure place to live. The crippling impact of past policies demands the urgent implementation of a national program of land reform and redistribution. At the same time, we must take account of the need to maintain food supplies and to provide equitable and orderly procedures so as to ensure that the transition is as smooth as possible, close quotes. That is what we said ahead of the breakthrough that we achieved on the 27th of April in 1994, as the ANC was readying itself to get into government and lead government. The report of the high-level panel, which was chaired by Comrade Kgalema Motlanthe at the instance of Parliament, has done impressive work in identifying some of the key challenges in the implementation of our policies. It is critical that we attend to the problems that the panel has identified and that have emerged from the deliberations at our 54th National Conference. Comrade Kgalema will be outlining in some depth some of their findings when he speaks later. We need to acknowledge that the lack of progress in land reform can be attributed to a great extent to weaknesses in the institutions responsible for effecting our policies. also to inconsistencies in legislation, including misguided interventions, and also to a misallocation of resources. In its report, the high-level panel refers, for example, to a total systems failure that has prevented effective implementation of legislation to protect the rights of farm dwellers. This workshop must discuss if that characterization is correct, and if it is, what we are going to do about it. We need to pay attention to other challenges as well, such as corruption and mismanagement, dysfunctional community property associations, the ongoing evictions of labor tenants, and the inadequacy of support to beneficiaries of land redistribution. Our responsibility is to ensure that we have a comprehensive, coherent, and sustainable program for land reform. We should also have a clear agrarian reform and spatial reform program to address the inequalities that still exist. It means that we need to explore all options for meaningful restitution, redistribution, and tenure reform. In the end, comrades, we will find as we work our way through all the initiatives that have been embarked upon on land reform that there is no one single solution to the land question. It requires a range of interventions addressing a diversity of needs across a wide range of circumstances, yet all of them are held together by an overarching framework for land reform. We need to study also the experiences of other countries that have used land reform effectively to address poverty and inequality. We must also assess our own innovative efforts, such as the 50-50 model, where established farmers enter into joint venture projects with their farm workers. We must also explore the approach suggested by some large landowners, such as the forestry, mining companies, that have said that they would be willing to give away land if agreements can be reached on the extraction and utilization of resources that they utilize for their production processes. Critically, we must give attention to the support that needs to be provided to beneficiaries of land redistribution. We must develop clear programs for the provision of finance, training, market access, irrigation, seeds, fertilizers, and equipment that contribute to the sustainability of emerging agricultural enterprises. The decision of the 54th Conference to use expropriation without compensation as a mechanism for land reform has ignited a vibrant and exciting debate within society. As we have said before, this debate presents an opportunity for a new, reinvigorated drive for meaningful and sustainable land reform. It is also an opportunity to assert the transformational intent of our Constitution and to recognize that the property clause in the Bill of Rights of our Constitution is in the end a mandate for radical transformation. As we said in the National Assembly 2 months ago, the property clause was never constructed for the purpose of retaining existing property relations. It is a transformational instrument constructed to facilitate the lawful transfer of land and property to South Africans who had been deprived of land through colonial and apartheid policies. It is our collective responsibility to use these provisions of our Constitution more effectively and more directly to drive land reform with greater urgency and purpose. We've been given, comrades, a historic opportunity to resolve once and for all the land question in South Africa. Let us seize this moment. Let us shoulder this responsibility. Let us work together to ensure that within the space of a generation, we will be able to declare, as Sol Plaatje hoped, that the South African native should no longer and never will be a pariah in the land of their birth. And perhaps Alfred Taike of Canada, his poignant statement puts it well. The voices of our ancestors still call out to us, and their wisdom still flows through our veins. We just need to start listening to them. It's all about the land, close quotes. And it is at this workshop that we should heed the voices of our ancestors. This is what this workshop presents to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade President. Where is our communication team? I thought our relationship with our friends from the media has come to an end. We love you too much, but we don't want you to analyze this workshop before we finish. So our relationship with our friends from the media.
Live visuals straight from Boksburg at the ANC's Land Summit that will run for this weekend. And ANC President there, Cyril Ramaphosa, saying that this is a very important and sensitive matter.
The national chairperson says I can't talk like that to friends. Oh, okay. My apologies, my friends.